The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm election. Up until now on Before You Vote, we have highlighted the candidates, both Republican and Democrat, in the primaries for governor of the state of Arizona. In this edition of Before You Vote, we are going to highlight the other 5 statewide races as well as the governor's race to give you some final information while you make that all-important decision. If you'd like to view those interviews we've done with the candidates on the gubernatorial races, then you can just go to aztv.com/vote. But we are going to go over these very important primary races, including the Senate race for Mark Kelly and the 5 statewide races for in-state races that are going to change the direction of Arizona. It is that important that you vote. If you are a voter that has a disability, at the end of the show, or if it's someone in your family does, we are going to have time for you to see exactly who you contact and what you do to make sure that your vote is cast. Finally, I want to say before we start, we've got new polling data that came out on Friday. We are only 2 days away from primary day, but on Friday, a new poll came out from OH Predictive Insights that shows that all of the Trump-endorsed candidates in the Republican side, or on the Republican side, have taken bigger leads or big leads in those races. We're giving you this for information, but what I don't want to happen is for you to decide not to vote. What I mean by that is if your candidate looks way out in front, don't believe for a moment that your vote doesn't matter. And the same if your candidate is behind in a race. There are still a lot of undecided voters out there. Every vote counts, and we are giving you information that includes polling, but it is in no way to change your mind about whether you do or don't vote. I would always say to you, do your homework, make sure you understand the candidates, vote your conscience for the person that you believe is best to represent you in the state of Arizona and even in Washington, D.C., and what's best for the state. That's why we're doing this on Before You Vote. So do yourself a favor, stick around, settle in. We've got 6 races to cover and some great information before it's all over. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. We appreciate you being with us. Our goal in all of these shows Before You Vote is for informed voters. Most of the time we've spent has been on the governor's race, but to close out before the primary on Tuesday, we wanted to discuss all of the races, all statewide races, a total of 6. And I want to say, like I said at the beginning of the show, the polling numbers that I'm going to give you about these races should not dissuade anyone from going to the polls. One of the reasons why we don't have exit polling on Election Day is because we don't want to chase people away from the polls. When you see a number that says the candidate I like is way out in front, sometimes people say, well, then my vote doesn't matter. I'm busy. I'm not going to vote, or I'm not going to mail in my ballot because I think they've already got it won. Or if you have a candidate that's not as far ahead in the polls or is trailing behind, to think it's out of reach, it can't be won. None of this is meant to do that. You should always cast your vote for the candidate that you think is best equipped for each of these races. So the polling numbers I'm giving you are just the most recent polling numbers, but they are not meant to dissuade you from going to the polls in any way. Let's start off with the state treasurer's race. Now, the state treasurer is basically the banker for the state of Arizona. They invest the state's money. They make sure the pension system's the way it's supposed to be. They oversee the state land trust. It's a very important office. There is only one Democrat that's running. His name is Martin Quezada. He's been around Arizona politics for well over a decade, well respected within his party. But since he's the only Democrat candidate, we're going to focus on the battle for the Republicans and who's in that race as well. Kimberly Yee is leading. As a matter of fact, she has opened up a 33-12 lead to her closest competitor. Kimberly Yee is the current incumbent state treasurer in Arizona, so she already has the job. There are two businessmen that are also running for this office. One of them is Jeff Weniger. He has now got 12% support, and behind him is Bob Lettieri, another businessman, believe in solar power in his background. He is following in third place in that race right now. But those are your three Republican candidates. Kimberly Yee, the current incumbent, and then the other two businessmen, and Jeff Weniger, also a state legislator, and Bob Lettieri. Those are the three people on the Republican side of that important race. Next, we want to talk about the Attorney General's race. The Attorney General in the state of Arizona, for lack of a better term, is the lawyer that represents the citizens of Arizona. And our current Attorney General is running for the Senate seat. We're going to talk about him in a few minutes. But if you've noticed, you've probably seen in the news that he's been involved in a lot of lawsuits against the federal government. He's testified before the Supreme Court on behalf of the citizens of Arizona when the Attorney General believes that the federal government is overstepping their rights within the states. So that's one of the things they do. They also they're the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Arizona. So it's a very, very important job. Once again, we have one Democrat in the race. Her name is Chris Mays, and she is running. And so since she's the only Democrat, we are going to take a look at the Republicans that are running. Who has jumped to a big lead is Abe Homiday. He made the biggest jump in the month of July, jumping 24 percentage points in support to now take a 31-16 lead next to his closest competitor. Abe Homiday is a veteran, and he's the youngest candidate in all of these races. Then you have Rodney Glassman, also an Air Force prosecutor and practices law in Arizona as well. Rodney Glassman also gained, some really big numbers, but still trails. He gained 10% in support. It now sits at 16%. Then there's Andy Gould, who is a former member of the Arizona Supreme Court, Dawn Grove, Tiffany Shedd, and then Lacey Cooper. Those are the candidates in this race. And I will say again, these are very important races, and we suggest, even though we're talking about polling and just a little bit about the candidates, make your decision based on your own homework. Go to the AZTV website, where you can go there and you can see links to these candidates and to our interviews, but you also can find out more information on how to vote and where to find each specific candidate. Now, we want to talk about the United States Senate. It is a statewide race, but Mark Kelly, the Democrat incumbent, currently holds that seat. He's running for re-election. So let's talk about the Republicans that are challenging him. Of course, we know that there's a 50-50 split in Washington, D.C. The Republicans are desperately trying to gain control of the Senate by having the majority. Can they do it, and can Mark Kelly hang on to his seat? He's being challenged. His primary challenger, when I say primary challenger, right now number one in polling is Blake Masters. Worked for a big tech firm. He has jumped 11 percentage points. He has now opened up a 15-point lead over his next competitor, which is Jim Lehman, a businessman and a veteran himself, who holds 21% in this latest OH Predictive Insights poll. Mark Brnovich, our current Attorney General, jumped into this race and has been leading the race for most of the primary, but in the last few weeks, he has been passed, in polling anyway, been passed by Masters and by Lehman. Then you have General Mick McGuire. General McGuire was the Adjutant General over the Arizona National Guard for quite a long time, worked for the Ducey administration. He's polling at 5% right now. And then you have Justin Olson, who is in this race as well. Those are your candidates for the United States Senate. In the United States Senate race, you understand what happens in Washington, D.C. We send two senators. They have 6-year terms. Mark Kelly is trying to win this seat so that he can start his 6-year term and represent the state of Arizona. For the first time in a very long time, a couple of generations, we have two Democrats representing the state of Arizona in the United States Senate. The senior senator, Kyrsten Sinema, is not up for re-election. Mark Kelly is the one that's up for election this time. I will reiterate, these are important races. I don't want to be the person that makes your decision for you or makes you lean one way or the other. I want to give you as much information as possible so that you can be an informed voter and make a decision that you believe is best for you and for the state of Arizona. What we're going to do is cover the last 3 races in the statewide races, including the Secretary of State and the governor's race and the Superintendent of Public Schools. That's what we're going to do in the next segment of the show. I'll reiterate one more time. We're giving you polling numbers and where candidates stand in the latest polls that we have. That should not stop you from going to the polls. These are not final numbers, and we want to make sure every one of you gets to the polls and votes your voice. We'll be back in a moment on Before You Vote. Coming up on Before You Vote, we continue to review these important races. We're looking at the candidates for Superintendent of Public Instruction, Secretary of State, and lastly, the governor's seat. Find out what you need to know in this 2022 midterm election. That's coming up next on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. I want to reiterate something again about the poll numbers we're giving you, because a lot of what we're doing now is setting you up for success when you vote, giving you as much information as we can. So two things. Number one, make sure you do your own homework. Don't take our word for it. Search around, ask questions, go to the website so you're an informed voter. These 6 races, these 6 statewide races, could dramatically change the political landscape, not only in America, but certainly right here in the state of Arizona. And secondly, when I give you these poll numbers, there's been a dramatic shift in the last couple of weeks. That doesn't mean that these elections are set in stone or over. So again, if your candidate's way out in front in one of these polls, don't believe that your vote doesn't count. Same thing goes if your candidate is behind. Your vote matters. Do not listen to polls and have it sway you one way or the other on whether or not you vote. If you're registered, if you've gotten an early ballot, please mail it in by the deadline. And if it isn't that it's mailed in by the deadline and you're going to the polls, please take the time on primary day and vote in this very important election. We just want to help you get there. 3 more races to talk about in this segment of the show, starting with the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The Superintendent of Public Instruction is just that, superintendent over all of our public schools. The Democrat in the race is the incumbent, Kathy Hoffman. So as we've been doing, we're going to talk about the races that there is a challenger. And so in the Republican primary for Superintendent of Public Instruction, leading right now, well, it's a dead heat statistically, but has been leading from the beginning of the race, is Tom Horne. It's a name you may recognize. Mr. Horne had been the superintendent in Arizona once before. He had also been the Arizona Attorney General, so he's won 2 statewide races in the past, and it held a pretty sizable lead. One of the big shifts is with Shiri Sapir. Shiri Sapir is a mom who got involved when the mask mandates were out and some other things. She decided it was time for her to get involved and has worked very hard. And in the latest polls, she has jumped 14 points into a statistical tie with Tom Horne at 21% support. In third place with 14% is Michelle Udall. She's a state legislator. She is also the chairwoman of the Education Committee in the House of Representatives. She is also running for this race. What's important to note, and like I said about these poll numbers, is there are still, as late as Friday, there is 44% undecided in this race. So it's anybody's ball game right now. Do your homework on this as well. The Superintendent of Public Schools and how we fix education and move in the right direction in Arizona is what this is all about. Now let's talk about the Secretary of State's race. We all understand that the Secretary of State oversees elections. Well, in the Secretary of State's race in Arizona, we have a couple of Democrats that are running for that spot as well. And it looks as if Adrian Fontes is way out in front in that for the Democrats. But we're going to find out in that race what happens as well. But let's talk about the Republican challengers, because there are a bunch of Republicans here. Mark Fincham is a state legislator. He's been a big name in the state of Arizona for quite a long time. He jumped up 18 points in the last couple of weeks, and he is now sitting at 32% support. Right behind that is Bo Lane at 11%. 21 points down is Mr. Lane. Michelle Ugenti-Rita, another state legislator who is running at 9%, and Shauna Bollock, also a state legislator in the House of Representatives, trails at 8%. But in this race as well, there is 41%. What is important about this race, more than anything else, is that the Secretary of State not only oversees elections in the state of Arizona, but we don't have a lieutenant governor in the state of Arizona. What we have here is a Secretary of State who is first in line. We have had a lot of governors that have left office for one reason or another. And if the governor leaves that office, or when the governor's out of state, the Secretary of State is in charge. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Is it a businessman like Bo Lane? Is it the other three that are in the state legislature? Which of these people do you believe is best qualified, not only to oversee our elections and do all the other important work, but also would they be a person that you'd be comfortable with in the governor's office? Very important race. Last but not least, let's take a look at the gubernatorial race. Before you vote, we have highlighted all of these candidates on both sides of the aisle. On the Democratic side of the aisle is our current Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, and former mayor of Nogales is also in this race. And when you look at the race as it is right now, it looks as if Katie Hobbs has got a very sizable lead. But again, if you're a Democratic voter, do your homework. The Republican side was very well contested for a while, but Carrie Lake has been in the lead since she jumped into this race. Latest polling shows Carrie Lake jumping out to an 18-point lead, and she has crossed over the 50% threshold to 51% support. Carrie Lake is a well-known name in Arizona. We know that Carrie Lake was a former member of the media here, working as an anchor in the news for a long time. In second place right now with 33% support is Karen Taylor-Robson, a small business owner, small businesswoman, and was really biting into that lead for a while until this latest poll. Matt Salmon has dropped out of the race, which leaves two other candidates who are on the ballot that are still in the race. Scott Neely, who was a businessman, and Paula Tuliani Zen, who was a businesswoman. Both of them bring a business perspective into this, but they both are only polling at about 1%. There are still 12% undecided in this race. Not as many as the other races, but there still is a lead there, and people are wondering how close this race is really going to be. This is an important race. The governor of Arizona is our chief executive, like the president is in the executive branch. I will say once again, don't let any of these poll numbers dissuade you from voting. Make sure you get to the polls and vote your conscience, and make sure you're an informed voter. You want to see all of these videos and all of these interviews we've done with our gubernatorial candidates? It's over at aztv.com/vote. We just want to help you be an informed voter. We got more to come here in a few moments, so stick around. This is Before You Vote. Coming up, we have some voter tips, and we look at what resources are out there for voters with disabilities and how you can still get involved at the polls. That's coming up right here in just a few moments on Before You Vote. Hey, welcome back to Before You Vote. I'm going to talk about voter access in a moment, but a few last-minute tips before we do that. Remember, if you are an independent voter and you did not get an early ballot and declare a primary, you're not changing parties. You can just show up at the polls, tell them that you want to vote in either one of the Republican or Democratic primaries, and vote on Election Day. If you're not sure where your polling place is, go to aztv.com/vote, and you can find your polling place there to vote at the polls on Tuesday. Now, if you are a voter with disabilities, here are some of the tips. Here's what we want you to know. In order to be able to cast your ballot for this very important election, you need to know a few things. Vote by mail, contact your elections office. You can request a Braille or a large print ballot. They are currently accepting requests for the 2022 November general elections. Now, voting at the polls. All voting locations should provide voter assistance, and they have all the services, and they are ADA accessible in Maricopa County. This includes large print, touch screens, audio-only assistance, and more. For voters that are unable to leave their vehicles, you may be able to use the curbside voting to cast your ballot at a voting location. Voters can remain in their vehicle while poll workers provide you assistance. If voters have questions, that they can contact the county elections department in the county you live in to find out if you have any one of these disabilities and you want to cast your vote. If you experience a disability-related problem in voting, you can contact the Arizona Center for Disability Law, the ACDL. They will host a voting hotline from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Election Day. The number is on the screen. This service is free of charge. Again, contact your county elections office for more information in that regard. We want to help you with all of this because we want you to be able to vote no matter what. We think that every election is the most important of our lifetime, and I agree that this one is. 6 statewide races that could change the complexity and the direction of the state of Arizona and our country with the race for the United States Senate. So no matter who you are or what the reason is that you believe you can't vote, I assure you there is a way for you to vote out there. What you should do is take that information down and make sure your voice is heard on Election Day. We'll be back here in just a few moments to wrap it up on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote, and thank you again for joining us today. Remember, the primary election is just 2 days away. It's August 2nd. If you need to find your polling place, head over to aztv.com/vote. There you'll also find links to other voter resources, such as candidate information for all of the races and all of our past interviews with the gubernatorial candidates. If you didn't send in your mail-in ballot and you want to drop it off, you have the opportunity to drop it off in person at a polling location. I want to also remind you that we are not done. After we're done with this episode of Before You Vote, where we highlighted all of these candidates, we are going to continue in the general election. Once this primary is decided and the candidates of each party are lined up, we are going to have other candidate interviews. We are going to have all the information on the important issues that are out there all the way up to the general election in November. So again, thank you for tuning in to Before You Vote. We're happy that you've been here with us. Have a good weekend, and I can't wait to see the primary results.